Hi, I'm Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor and a trauma therapist. And today I'm going to speak a little bit about transference, especially in relation to people with abandonment issues and how transference might interfere with their ability to remain confident and secure in romantic relationships. So, not everyone who's experienced abandonment during childhood will have developed the same way of coping with that early experience. But the way that their minds did cope with it usually determines how they respond to certain situations later in life. So, today I'm going to focus on those who experience people as being good or bad in the transference as a result of this. So, first, we need to simplify what is meant by transference. So, we could say that it's a psychological defense. It enables us to unconsciously transfer feelings that we have felt about something or someone in the past onto something or someone in the present. And this is about threat recognition in this context. So, an example of this happening to us in real time would be if we were to walk down the street and you saw someone coming towards you who reminded you or looked like a bully that terrorized you at school. It's likely that you're going to feel some sort of negative emotions or anxiety in response to that transference. And this is because your brain holds data that tells you that people who look like this are dangerous. And the transference buys you the time to react and survive. So it makes sense that your brain would transfer those historical memories onto that current situation, just so you can give yourself an option how to deal with that situation. So someone who hasn't experienced too much trauma in their life will more than likely quite quickly be able to rationalize the situation and realize that the person they've just met isn't the bully from childhood, and they'll probably start to relax. But someone who is hypervigilant due to historical trauma or they've had a lot of bad experiences, they're going to probably struggle to rationalize things in these situations because the logical thinking part of their brain doesn't have power over the hypervigilant, frightened part of the brain, which means they're more likely to continue to believe that the situation is dangerous. And this is typically what's happening for people with PTSD too. So if you think about people who have suffered some sort of abandoned trauma in childhood, these people might typically have developed an anxious or an avoidant personality style in response, which means that they now have an abandonment or a rejection phobia. So that phobic belief is likely to have them constantly scanning their environment for signs of impending abandonment whenever they're in relationships. So the person with abandonment issues differs from the person who was triggered by the school bully transference in that that person was only triggered by people who reminded them in some way of the bully. So anyone else might not be perceived as a threat at all. But in relation to those who suffered neglect or abandonment as children, it can often be the case that they'll transfer or project the feelings relating to their abandoning parent onto anyone who they get intimately or emotionally close to. And this would make logical sense to their child brain because, in effect, when they were little, it probably was most of the people that they were trying to attach to that was abandoning them. So they aren't going to trust. Why would they? So typically, people with abandonment issues often have very, very low self esteem. And this is because deep down they believe that they were not lovable or likable enough to be wanted as a child. So in adulthood, those deep rooted childhood beliefs often trigger a projected belief that anyone that they get close to won't want to be with them eventually because the parents didn't. So why would you? That, if I think I'm bad, you're going to believe I'm bad. You're going to discover I'm bad at some point. So to avoid the projective belief that they'll be abandoned by that person if they show their true self, they often present another version of themselves that they think would be more suitable for the person to attach to. So they might mirror the new person in their life and become interested in everything that they're interested in. If the new person wants someone who's very thin, they'll probably diet. Or if they meet someone who needs a shed load of attention, they'll use flattery. So in effect, to avoid rejection or abandonment, the abandoned person starts to be who they think the other person needs them to be, which typically sets them up at some point to feel resentment later on, because once again, it's them doing all of the work, which was possibly what they were doing in childhood when they were trying to seduce attention from inattentive parents. And they might not need to do all of this work. It's just that their projected belief is that the person won't want them if they're just who they are. It's because that part they don't believe is good enough. So at the start of the relationship, the abandoned person often idealizes the new partner, and really sort of feels that they're the one that has the capacity to meet their needs this time. This is the relationship that's going to work. This is nirvana for me. So at this stage, the new partner has become a good person or a good parent in the transference. And the person with the abandonment issues is going to believe that this feeling is a fact for a time. until the intimacy of the relationship or the partner in some way reignites their abandonment phobia. So once this phobia is awoken, the positive transference in which the new partner was idealized switches to the polar opposite. It's now bad transference, and the abandoned person now starts to perceive that the negative feelings that they're experiencing around their partner are fact. But what is actually happening is, in the transference, the partner is now being perceived as the original abandoning bad parent. So that's going to generate a lot of defensive moves and highly emotional reactions from the abandoned person. So at this point, you could say the repressed rage within the abandoned person that is really about their rejecting parents is often projected onto the partner, and the transference enables them to believe that their behaviors in response to that rage are justified. So in effect, their rage is now protecting them like they probably weren't able to protect themselves as children. As children, it was probably unlikely that their anger was accepted by their parents if they were being some way neglected or rejected. So in effect, it's a fight response. But the trouble is, it's the transference that's giving them the permission to feel the rage, and that rage isn't actually going in the right direction. This rage is about their parents, not their partner. So getting in touch with the rage isn't going to be reparative for them over the long term at all. In fact, it's only going to create more shame for them once the impulsive outrage has calmed down and they're left to face the consequences of that. So it might be then that they step out of that negative transference and back into positive transference and see their partner as once again being a good person or a good parent, if you think of it that way. But it's not typical for the abandoned person to learn from what's just happened and do something different in the future when the phobia once again gets triggered. So if they do once again experience the partner as being good in the transference and seduce them back, the shame of their recent behaviours is likely to be cutting deep, and that's probably going to add further fuel to their core belief that they're bad and unlovable, and at some point this person is going to remember how I've treated them and they're going to abandon me. So once again, they're going to find themselves eventually back in that cycle, which they're going to believe they're going to be rejected and abandoned. So the rage from the historical experience will probably once again be projected back onto the partner. And this is likely to go on until one of them breaks the cycle by leaving the relationship. So if the abandoned person holds on to the anger, though, that they're feeling about the other, then it's likely that the other person will not become good again in the transference. And this is another defensive strategy, because if they can hold on to the anger and the belief that the other person is bad, for one, they don't have to miss that person. And it'll also lower the level of shame and fear in their process because they're feeling anger instead of shame and fear. And fear and shame are probably the emotions they can tolerate the least. So their anger is also going to add muscle to the belief that the negative feelings they feel around the other in the transference are facts. And they're going to and it's going to make them believe that, yeah, they're right in getting out of the relationship before they were abandoned, because that's a good choice. So once again, they're proving to themselves that they're right not to trust anyone, because everyone abandons them or tries to abandon them eventually. And as long as they stick in that anger, that makes that detachment slightly easier for them. They don't have to grieve. They don't have to miss that person who they idealized only maybe a few months before. So if you're drawn to people with abandonment issues who keep getting caught up in these cycles of transference, it's likely that you too are caught up in some sort of transference of your own, because people who are brought up in environments where their needs were met consistently typically aren't drawn towards relationships with push-pull dynamics, as those types of relationships wouldn't feel comfortable for people who have secure attachment styles. So if you are drawn to people with abandonment issues, it's likely that you have similar wounds, but the way that you deal with your historical wounds in the transference might differ from how the abandoned person deals with theirs. But typically, some sort of early reenactment tends to be going on. And you're believing that the problem mainly lays with the abandoned person is perhaps the way that you remain in denial of your own attachment issues from childhood. And the lion's share of the responsibility being placed on the person with the abandonment issue often hooks into how they were typically made to feel or believe when they were small as well, that they were the cause of the problem, that it was all their fault, and they should feel all of the shame. So not addressing these historical wounds is damaging for both people in these relationships. The abandoned person is kept in shame or anger, and the other gets to remain in denial, and usually feels victimized by the other, which will probably be a familiar experience to something from their childhood. So, whichever role you are drawn to play in this relationship dynamic, you need to work on raising your awareness of this process so you can give yourself choices that don't end in abandonment or termination of relationships. And I guess the way for the abandoned person to grow is to really get that awareness of that feelings aren't facts, that just because they believe that that person is looking at them in a way that they don't love them anymore, don't want them anymore, that they're going to abandon them, it doesn't mean to say it's real. And that's going to be really hard for people with abandonment in their process to think a different way about, because the feelings are facts is a defense mechanism they use to protect themselves from abandonment. So you're actually trying to go against the core process, which isn't going to want to be changed. So I hope you found this video interesting. And if you want me to discuss any other areas of this topic in a bit more detail, just drop me a line in the comments and I'll see if I can do you a video. And so thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. And I'll pop another one up shortly. Take care. Bye.